In 1998, helped to secure the ballot line the first time. In 2005, she ran for mayor here in the city of Albany, received nearly 30% of the vote. She's a longtime social justice advocate and all-around wonderful person. So, Alice, if you'd like to come on up.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, this is a really wonderful opportunity for me to talk about Howie Hawkins. I've known Howie for quite a while, and I'm pleased to be here today to introduce him and to talk a little bit about why I think it's important that Howie run for governor of New York State again on the Green Party ticket, as he did in 2010 and 2014. Howie has been a really strong and consistent organizer for peace and justice on many fronts since 1967. And it includes areas like labor, the Vietnam War, environment, and racism. And he played one of the strongest leadership roles in the anti-apartheid divestment movement. So today I want to mention 3 of the reasons why I believe that all New Yorkers, and especially working class and people of color, will be well served by Howie running again for governor this year. First of all, Howie has a proven record, a track record of working hard and having the courage to always speak truth to power. In that respect, he deeply understands one of the strongest and most destructive scourges of our nation and state, and that is structural racism. It continues unabated, and most politicians fear to even talk about it, or even to make a strong commitment to end it. So I know Howie can be counted on to do just that. Secondly, Howie has always listened to, understood, and articulated the oppression of black and brown people present in the state's criminal justice system. And it's a system that's so devastating to people of color that it needs to be recreated in a way that rids it of the racism that we see, of the philosophy of cruel punishment and harm, and a dependence upon mass incarceration. All across the state, communities of color are demanding a system that values fairness, equity, justice, and all human life. Until that can be achieved, we must work for real change that moves us in that direction, and Howie is committed to working for that kind of change. Third here, I want to list just some of the primary criminal justice reform demands that I know Howie and the Green Party will support and embrace, and they are ones that we care deeply about. The first one deals with true bail reform in New York State. We must get rid of cash bail that keeps thousands of people in our jails who have not been convicted of anything, but they're locked up in jail simply because they cannot afford the money to pay for their freedom. And that shouldn't be happening. The other thing is speedy trial reform. For too long, too many of our youth, poor people, and those of color have sat in our jails awaiting trial while their bodies, their minds, hopes, dreams, families, and lives are slowly destroyed. Such was the case, as you probably remember, of 16-year-old Khalid Browder, who was held in Rikers Island for 3 whole years. This kind of treatment must end. There needs to be also parole reform. Much needs to be reformed in that system, but we need to immediately stop sending people to prison for violations of simple conditions of parole and probation, such as missing an appointment with your counselor. This practice is adding to the problem of mass incarceration and the destruction of families and, of course, our communities. The other issue is universal suffrage. While New York has done something to change the prison gerrymandering practices that it was involved in, it continues to deny the right to vote to those serving time in our prisons or on parole. This practice has serious ramifications for Black and brown people who are disproportionately incarcerated in our jails and our prison. And of course, it dilutes the voting strength of communities of color. The other issue that we're going to be working on, and we are certain that Howie can help with this, is we've asked for the establishment of a Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission. We've called on the governor for a number of years to do that, and we need to thoroughly examine the impact that mass incarceration and the Rockefeller drug laws have had and continue to have on communities of color in particular, and they need to make strong recommendations to repair the damage, the terrible damage that these policies have done. Howie Hawkins strongly supported this demand in 2014, and I know he will again this year. So it is certainly, having said that, it's certainly a pleasure for me to introduce Howie Hawkins, who will work hard again on these and many other issues that we all care deeply about. And all New Yorkers should listen to Howie Hawkins because he has much to say about how we can get ourselves out of all of these issues and problems that I've mentioned. So I present to you Howie Hawkins.
Well, I'm proud to have Alice Green introduce me. I just wish she'd be my running mate for lieutenant governor, but she's got a full agenda and it's important work. And I'm also glad she introduced me because when people think of green, it's sort of the first thing they think of, oh, they're the environmentalists. But we have an understanding that the attempt to dominate nature is connected to the domination of human by human. So that when we dominate, exploit each other, those same attitudes are extended toward our regard for nature. And so in order to reharmonize society with nature, we got to reharmonize human with human and do away with these injustices from racism, sexism, and class exploitation and all the other ways people are dominated by structural injustice. And I'd also note, she mentioned Khalif Browder, who was locked up because he couldn't make bail for a few years, and he had a bad time in prison, got a lot of beatings, and when he came out, he couldn't handle it. He ended up committing suicide. His brother ran for mayor as the Green candidate last year in New York City, and I've been seeing him on TV. He's down here lobbying for that bail reform, which we strongly support. So I'm going to try to compress what are a lot of issues the state faces into about 10 or 12 minutes. And we sort of come to the theme that our theme's going to be, our slogan's going to be demand more. We're saying to the people in New York, and particularly the progressives, you got to have higher expectations from our government. We got politicians going to prison more than any other state, over 40 since 2000, both parties. We have higher expectations of what government can and should do. We want more reforms. We believe that 5% that we got in 2014 made Cuomo compete for progressive votes and make some moves our way to try to get those votes back, like the ban on fracking, which we campaigned for, the $15 minimum wage, paid family leave, the millionaire's tax. And I've got a list now of 19 different issues where he's at least talked our way if he hadn't completed the action that's needed. And then we want to demand more than piecemeal reforms. We got to demand system change because we're facing life and death issues, climate catastrophe, and let's face it, poverty kills. People of color have had lower life expectations because they're on the lower part of an unjust economic system, and now the system's really hammering the whole working class, and we know life expectancies for white working people have been going down the last decade. That's a crisis that's totally unnecessary in a society as rich as ours. So we have crises, and it's going to take system change to find real solutions to these problems. So that's what demand more means. Higher expectations, more reforms, and system change. Raising expectations starts with cleaning up Albany. And we've got down here a quid pro quo, pay-to-play culture of corruption. And even when they don't find proof of legal bribery, these campaign contributions from the rich and the corporations expecting favors is legalized bribery, which Grandpa Al Lewis used to talk about when Alice Green was his lieutenant governor running mate back in 1998. And nothing's changed since then. Just a lot more politicians have gone to prison, and we probably only know the tip of the iceberg. And like I said, what isn't brought before the courts is still legalized bribery, and the rich folks have undue influence. So if we're going to eliminate the quid pro quo, eliminating the quid means something for something, quid pro quo. What's the first something? The campaign contributions. We're saying we need a clean money system, full public campaign financing. If you opt in, you get a grant sufficient to communicate your message to the voters, and you take no private money. And because of Buckley v. Vallejo, some people will take private money, they'll get it from the rich, but at least it'll be clear who they are and where their money's coming from. And we're not settling for this partial matching fund system, which the Democrats who used to have a clean money bill have switched to. And all that does is put some matching funds on top of the same old pile of crap, the private money. It makes it look good, and it's still a steaming pile of crap. And that's a reform that doesn't reform, and we're not going to stand here and say we're going to settle for that. We're not. And then eliminating the pro quo means eliminating the corporate welfare that Cuomo's turned into a statewide patronage system and has fed this corrupt culture of pay-to-play. And what he does is supply-side trickle-down economics. It's the conservative economics that's been the dominant bipartisan policy for the last 40 years. And look at upstate New York. We're still struggling. We get a Buffalo billion, and we build a factory in Syracuse for a company that decides not to come. And it's really about creating favors instead of a level playing field for all businesses and really improving the business climate. Our alternative is demand side instead of supply side. Bottom up instead of trickle down. Improve the conditions for working people. And we got to improve our own conditions. I hope these nurses vote for the union at the Albany Medical Center. I know they're voting right now. We want the direct benefits, not indirect through the rich. It's supposed to trickle down. It never does. And when we do that and increase the benefits directly to the working people, it increases demand. That stimulates the economy, and they have to expand business and hire people and create jobs to meet that demand. And so when we talk about the Green New Deal, a lot of times it sort of gets shortened down to the clean energy thing. We're going to build clean energy and create a lot of jobs, and that's certainly a central piece of it. Well, we're talking about revitalizing the whole public sector. We need broadband that everybody has access to and can afford. We need, what, $100 billion? It's $100 billion for mass transit to fix up the system down at the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in New York City, plus billions more to upgrade the system so it reaches the outer boroughs and then our upstate communities. $25 billion just in the NYCHA. And we want public housing. Talk about structural racism. That was part of the structural racism. They created people of color, low income, ghettoized them, separated, segregated them, and increased the segregation. We want to use public housing to desegregate, scatter site, quality, middle class, and low income, like they do in Europe. Some of those countries are 30% of the housing is public. They have mixed income, and they don't, and that creates a market where the rents come down all over the whole market. So landlords, it creates a yardstick that the landlords have to compete with. So we want to revitalize the whole public sector, the infrastructure and the public services. And I will argue with the Republicans that that will do better to improve the business climate than their constant tax cuts for the rich and deregulating. We create a level playing field. What we do is lower the cost of living and doing business in New York. Lower the overhead, broadband, energy, and the roads and the transportation infrastructure, and those are the public avenues of private commerce. And that will create a better business climate than these special favors to sectors, which is about politics, not sound economics. So that's our general approach. We call it the Green New Deal. And I'll get to taxing Wall Street, but it's about investing in Main Street. And we're also running for specific reforms that we think we can win. I mentioned ones we got in the last round. And I'll just mention, this goes back to when Alice ran with Grandpa Lewis. We got reforms out of the Rockefeller drugs laws that they brought to the fore in that campaign. We got marriage equality in this state because Jason West, the Green mayor of New Paltz, and Rebecca Rotzler, the deputy mayor Green of New Paltz, started doing gay marriages, first gay marriages in New York State. And that kicked off the movement. 7 years later, it was law. And I mentioned the fracking ban. I started campaigning out in 2010 when most of the environmental movement was either saying it's a bridge to the renewable future, which Cuomo still says sometimes, and we say that's not a bridge, that's a cliff, and you're going to go into the abyss of climate catastrophe because that'll just increase greenhouse emissions. Or others were saying study it and have a moratorium while we study it. And the ban got picked up after 2010 and spread throughout the movement, and by 2014 I think it was irresistible. And when I think I'll give Zephyr Teachout credit. Her third of the vote in the Democratic primary. We got about the same number of votes in the general. 5% of the general. Cuomo said, man, what do I got to do to get those votes? Because he wants to use them to launch a run for president. So that's to say what the Greens doing has mattered, and it's going to matter in this election. Now, I'll get to a few specific reforms, and we can talk more about them. But one of the things we're talking about is school funding. And we are definitely for fully funding the foundation aid form, and in fact reforming it so it really is equitable and adequate for all communities, and particularly the high poverty districts. And we got Cuomo out here with Schneiderman in the courts fighting people from high poverty school districts who are in court trying to get the old campaign for fiscal equity case reaffirmed and get their money that they've been promised. The state is $4.3 billion behind on the foundation aid formula that passed in 2007. That's just shameful. But we're talking about much more. Full funding is not enough. We have the most segregated schools in the country. New York schools have got steadily more segregated since Brown v. Board of Education made legalized segregation illegal. 90% of black students, no, I'm sorry, 2/3 of black students in the state go to schools that are 90% minority. And when you segregate people in high poverty districts, not so much about black and white, it's about being separated, isolated from opportunities, from jobs, from education, from transportation to get the jobs. And all the things, the social networks. Well, how'd you get your first job? It's likely you got it because somebody you knew somebody that made a recommendation about you. If you're segregated from all that, you don't have opportunity. So it's not about a black kid sitting next to a white kid. It's about low-income kids sitting next to middle-income kids that got more resources. And the record of that is the most effective educational reform we've had since Brown v. Board of Education has been desegregation in terms of closing the achievement gaps on the basis of race and class, and actually it improves the education for all the students in issues that are not tested on these high-stakes tests like leadership skills, creativity, collaboration, tolerance, and so forth. So that we are going to raise as a big issue. And we just saying it's time to just simply end the high-stakes testing. I applaud the students and parents that opted out this week on the math test. The English tests are coming up. Those are about ranking the schools, the teachers, and the students. And by definition, the bottom 5% are defined as failed. And what that does is justify closing those schools and turning them into charters, which are sucking money out of the public school system and making the high poverty districts even more underfunded. And we are calling for a stop of that. Cuomo's agenda has been test, punish, privatize, and segregate. And it starts with those high-stakes testing. That was the substitute for desegregation. We got to go back to desegregation. That really has to be part of educational reform. Single-payer health care, the New York Health Act can pass. It's about to pass the Assembly for the 4th year in a row. It's one vote short of a majority in the Senate. Cuomo has said it's a good idea, and we're saying you better use your political capital and get the Senate to vote on it this year, so at least we got them on record by November so we can vote out those that voted against it. And that's a reform that's coming, and we're going to make that a big issue. 100% clean energy. This is a constant refrain from us. We got the ban on fracking. The next demand of that movement is a ban on all new fossil fuel infrastructure. I was talking about this in 2014. We build natural gas pipelines, compressor stations, storage facilities, and power plants we're locked into 30 or 40 years of more greenhouse gases. And then it'll be too late to avert climate change. We got to stop that and put 100% of our effort into clean, renewable energy. There's a bill in the Assembly to plan that transition over the next 15 years, the Holman-Colton bill. We support that. There's also a bill that has a lot of good things in it, Climate and Protection, our Community Protection Act, good things on just transition and making sure the money goes to disadvantaged communities. But the goals are inadequate from what the science tells us. They want to get to 50% in 2030 and 100% in 2050. And meanwhile, Cuomo is going for 50% in 2050. They're too little, too late. We got to go for 100%. And let me just finish, I think, on the tax issue. Cuomo says he's a progressive who's broke. And that's why he can have these austerity budgets that really don't provide the social services or the public investments and infrastructure that we need. I'm a progressive who knows where the money is. The rich got it, and they got to pay the kind of taxes they paid back in the 1970s. If we had the kind of tax structure we had back then, we'd have $10 billion more in revenue. If we kept stock transfer tax like we did back then, we have about almost $15 billion and more. And I've got a whole menu of reforms. You can look them up. We need a multi-millionaires tax, not just a millionaires tax, to graduate as you go from a few millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions. And we need a surcharge on, or a clawback tax on companies that don't take the federal tax cuts that the Congress and Trump just gave them and put it into workers' wages. Let's put that into the public benefit, the public treasury here in New York. And you can go through those, but you put them all together, including tax cuts for working people. The bottom bracket is now 4%. Back in the 70s, it was 2%. So it was Mario Cuomo where most of this happened. They flattened the tax rate. They hiked it on the low income and cut it for the high income. We want to make it more progressive again. And we also want circuit breakers for renters and homeowners, so there's a limit on how much of their income they pay for rent or for property taxes. And the key thing is we got to restore revenue sharing. Our upstate cities and towns and counties are struggling. Some of them are on the verge of bankruptcy, and my city being one of them, Syracuse. And this state's off the charts. 15% of our local property and sales taxes go to pay for unfunded mandates. In almost every other state, it's near zero. We are off the chart. And then they wonder how come our property taxes are so high. If we restore revenue sharing, we can fully fund local public services and cut property taxes. And that's effective. And I'll say the Republicans are, trying to scare people. Oh, you get a fully democratic government and they're going to raise your taxes. That's their scare tactic. Well, I say we should be scared of the Republicans because they don't believe what they say. They don't talk about revenue sharing, which is probably the best, maybe the only good Republican idea in the last half century. And they don't believe in local control because Cuomo, fixes how much money you get, and then he says you got to consolidate, which really doesn't save money. So we got a tax proposal that I think will be of great interest to the people upstate. And so I got to say a word, even though I'm getting the signal, I'm getting to my time. I mentioned system change and ecological socialism, and you're probably going to ask questions about that. I'm already getting them. Basically, socialism to us is extending democracy into the economy. And as long as we have an economy that's based on competition and endless, blind, compulsive growth, we can't balance with the environment. That kind of growth is killing the environment. And as long as working people get a fixed wage and all the value they add is taken by the owners, we're going to have increasing polarization of income and wealth. And the way it's been going the last half century, now that we sort of got past the post-World War II period, which had unique circumstances, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And that's unacceptable because, as I said, poverty kills. So what we do in New York, and our campaign will be part of this, matters. There are life and death issues we're facing. New York is on the world stage. If it was ranked among the world's nations by GDP, we'd be tied for Canada at 10th largest nation in the world. We'd be ahead of Russia, Australia, Spain. And just like the New Deal started in New York and went national, we're saying a Green New Deal could start in New York, go national, and actually be an example for the whole world. So, what our little Green Party does matters, and we hope to make a big difference in this campaign. So with that, thanks for coming, and I'll take questions.
Howie, this is the third time on the ballot for you. Assuming you're the final candidate. That can be viewed as a positive, right? Someone who people know a little bit more about, but it can also be viewed as a negative, I guess. What are your thoughts of being now the third time around here? You've got more experience under your belt. What can you offer people that say someone who's never done this before can?
Most people tell me, keep trying. They like what I say. They like that I keep trying. And I keep trying to tell them, you don't have to win the office to make a difference. And we've made a difference. I'm trying to get other people to run. I want to replace myself. And it just didn't happen this year. So I just finished working at UPS unloading trucks overnight. So this time I'll be able to devote full time to it for the next 7 months. So we'll see what happens, in those new circumstances. But one of the things we'll be doing out there is organizing more local groups and helping them get better organized so that they can begin to develop candidates by running locally. And you get elected locally, do a good job, then you can run for state or Congress and state legislature or Congress. And that's how we're going to build the Green Party into a major party.
As you travel the state, are you going to get involved in any of the state Senate races at all? Are you going to maybe endorse candidates for that?
I'll stay out of endorsing major party fights. I may have opinions on those candidates, but they can take care of themselves. We have some Greens that are running. I know there's one in Buffalo. I don't know who else running. The petition deadline is today, and we'll see, who stepped up. And I'll definitely support the Green candidates.
You say you don't have to win the office to still make a difference. How do you hope to still make that difference if you don't?
Because the vote for us is a vote somebody else didn't get that won. And being politicians, they want to know how they can get those votes. And I think that's what motivated Cuomo to adopt a lot of things he was either opposed to or was afraid to take a position on. He was opposed to the millionaire's tax. He dismissed $15 an hour. Paid family leave, that's something that they were talking about, but he wasn't really pushing it hard until after 2014. And the ban on fracking, I'll tell you, I've been involved in moves. I helped organize the occupation of the Seabrook nuclear power plant in 1977. We got 1,414 people arrested. It kicked off a whole big anti-nuclear movement. And we thought we had a big struggle then. And when I looked at who we were against on the fracking issue, it was Wall Street. It was all the big oil and gas companies. It was investors from everywhere from Saudi Arabia to China. I thought, man, we got to fight them, but this is really going to be hard. And we won. And that's kind of, victory really gives me hope about the kind of things we can do. And so, I think I don't want to take, all the credit for getting the fracking ban, but I think the fact that we got 5% in 2014 meant Cuomo, even though all the power structure was for it, he said, I got to come out against it because the people are against it. So, my message to voters is vote for what you want. You may not get the candidate to talk about what you want, but what you want will have to be taken into account. So use your vote to say what you want, not do what I call political ventriloquism, where you vote for the lesser evil and then try to lobby them and get them to say what you want them to say. You're not in a powerful position when you do that.
I know you offered to sit down with Cynthia Nixon. I think you put out a release when she entered the race. What are some of the differences between the two of you? She's drawing a lot of attention from progressives right now.
Well, I think the basic difference is strategy. She's a Democrat. She thinks you can move the Democrats to a position that will really take care of the people's needs. We've had Democratic, all Democratic government in New York and in Washington in 2010. You can find every Democratic president's had both houses of Congress for at least 1-2 year period. And they can't get them the reforms passed that they really believe because part of their party really doesn't want them. And their funders, their big funders don't want them. So it's not reliable for progressives. But I think that's one big difference. I don't know how she's going to come out on all the positions. Another difference is I will answer questions at every news conference. Apparently she hasn't done that yet. I saw one of the reporters complaining about that the other day. She's talking about full funding for public schools. I'm glad she is. Haven't heard her talk about desegregation and how we do that. I didn't get to it here, but I think we got to provide the kind of incentives Cuomo wants to provide for town and city and village consolidation with counties to have consolidation of school districts that cross the boundaries, because those school district lines have become like the Jim Crow lines today in New York. And if you're going to desegregate, you really got to have a different pool on which you draw students. So we'll see if she picks up on that issue. So yeah, and as far as Syracuse, yeah, I said if she wants to have an open forum and a discussion of the issues in Syracuse, I'd be happy to do that, help organize it or host it. She came and had a meeting. She invited some people. Actually, I know all those people. Some of them are Greens. So it was kind of a listening tour for her. You know, we'll see what happens. We haven't had direct communication with her. I'm sure we will somewhere down the way.
Kicking off in Albany today. I mean, are you doing this in Buffalo, Rochester? What's the plan after
Yeah, I'm
this?
going back to Syracuse tonight, Rochester, Buffalo tomorrow, and then next week, Binghamton, New York City. And Utica, I was there last night for another event, but some Greens there were going to get something together soon. So, yeah, I'll be all over the state. Okay, one more.
Yeah, what kind of, what's your plans in terms of labor this time out? We've seen the rebellion of the teachers across the country. And right here in Albany, the nurses are having a major election in Albany. What's going to be approach on that?
Mostly to the rank and file in most of the unions, because the leadership's already pretty much thrown in with Cuomo in most of these unions. And that worked last time. We got 6 teachers locals to endorse us, even though NYSA stayed officially neutral. We will seek interviews with, through their process. We'll ask for them. Don't know if we'll get them. We sometimes get it, sometimes we don't. Like the transit workers in New York. We did get an interview, but Samuelson has already come out for Cuomo and blasted Blasio and some kind of dispute down there. Those guys are always fighting. So I think, plus we got a program that's pro-labor. I mean, we're raising issues that just the others aren't raising. Like, we ought to have, it was supposed to be a reform that happened when Obama got elected, card check, majority sign-up recognition of unions, so they get collective bargaining status. Democrats got elected and they didn't do it. See, that's the difference between me and Nixon. She thinks that party can deliver it. They don't. We don't do that at the state level. We want a just cause law like Montana has and most European countries have, which means that you cannot be fired at will. It has to be for just cause. It has to be a legitimate business reason, or you're not performing the duties of the job. You just can't fire somebody at will because, I used to happen to me all the time in construction. You're working on a job and suddenly the contractor's nephew needs a job, or a couple of nephews, and you got to fire a couple of people. He says, I don't need you anymore. We're doing a good job. We're working hard. Yeah. I'm going to hire these nephews. And that's unjust. So, reforms like that. And anytime there's a picket line that I can get to, I'll be there. I've done that a lot. Momentum, these hotel workers here. I did mention earlier that I hope the nurses are voting for the union today. I think yesterday and today is the election. So, and I'm a labor guy going way back. I joined a union in the Marine Corps, the American Servicemen's Union. That was my first one. And Carpenters Union, I've been a Teamster. So, not that I agree with everything unions do or how they're structured. We're trying to get to be more democratic, but on the other hand, it was better to have a contract in a union than not, even if my union had some problems.
So, part of the situation we have is that over half or a very large chunk of people who can vote or even register to vote aren't voting at all in these governor's races. What is your campaign going to do to address that?
We're going to work with your Upper Hudson Valley Greens and the other green groups, and we're going to give you training in voter ID, canvassing, keeping lists, getting out to vote. So you learn how to get these people. So you're going to go talk to those people and tell them why it matters that they vote. And that we know from social science research, that's the most effective way to get those people to vote. Personal contact from somebody who they identify with as appear to them that they feel like, okay, if they're doing it, maybe I should do it. And he's giving me good or she's giving me good reasons. That's how we do it. And then we've got to have an organization, a party that can bring people across our barriers of race and suburb versus city and different occupations. Because working class people are identified not as workers with a common interest, but as this group or that group. We're in silos, the funding is silos, the issues are separate, and we're all competing for each other, and the power structures, throwing crumbs here and there, for which of us could beg better than the next one. And that is not a position of power, and that's one thing, well, that's another reason why we need a third party, to really organize people across the things that are dividing us now, so we really have the power that we could have, because we are the majority, we're the immense majority. We just aren't organized and expressive. The organized people can beat the organized money if we get organized. So we're going to organize. That's what we're going to do. And,
thank you, everyone. That's all the time that we have, unless if you have a chance to finish the question.
That was the last word. Organized.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you're a member of the press and you haven't signed in yet, we'd really appreciate it if you did sign in, and feel free to get a hard copy of the news release on the way out. And thanks so much. HowieHawkins.org for more events, news appearances, and media as we release it.